Hi and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here today, and today I'm going to be painting this summer lake scene with a mature tree in the foreground and beautiful white clouds scudding across a perfect blue summer sky. It's going to be a loose painting, painted wet in wet, and I'm going to focus to start with on getting a beautiful clean sky wash. I'm using Millford cold pressed watercolour paper. It's taped to my board, and my board's at an angle of about 45 degrees so that gravity will help me paint. It's 11 inches by 15 inches or 28 centimetres by 38 centimetres. I'm going to paint the sky and the lake wet in wet to start with. So I'm wetting the page all over with horizontal brush strokes using a large wash brush. Any wash brush will do. Today I'm using my Princeton Aqua Elite 1.5 inch modeler. I want to make sure I get the sky nice and wet, not running with water, so I'm going to let it soak in for a little bit, and I shall leave a few dry patches across the land area so that I get some lost and found edges. In other words, some soft edges and some hard edges where the paint diffuses into the wet areas and resists the dry areas a little bit more. This is cerulean blue. So I'm keeping it a little bit darker, top right, allowing it to drift down and become paler and missing out some areas, but keeping my brush strokes horizontal. Now I'm washing out my brush and squeezing all the water out with my hand and then wiping it on a tissue so that it's almost dry but just damp. Then I can scrub into the paint quickly and carefully and remove some of the paint. So I'm lifting out these clouds. It's very important that your brush isn't too wet at this point. If it's too wet, if it's wetter than the sky wash itself, then you could create nasty cauliflowers and runbacks. So now I'm just using a little bit more of that colour to put across into the lake area, keeping it nice and flat, nice and horizontal, and then just softening back as the wash dries, softening back where there's a little bit too much paint pooling up from gravity at the top of those marks, and then going in with a tissue so I can get some really white, bright marks here and there, just light, soft, fluffy clouds. Then back in with a damp brush. I'm trying to get a mixture of soft and hard edges of really bright white where the sunlight is hitting it, and softer white that's a little bit more in shadow. And that's it. That's how you paint these beautiful fluffy white clouds. Well, it's one way of doing it. Of course, there are many, many ways. This is a nice, easy way for beginners. It's a little bit harder than it looks, so it might take a bit of practice, but it's worth persevering with this technique because it can be really effective. So while the paper is still damp, I'm going to drop in my tree line so that my distant tree line gently diffuses into the wash and softens back to give me that sense of aerial perspective. This is Paynes grey and burnt umber, a slightly drier mix so that I don't get any cauliflowers, and just using the tips of the brush to create the impression of a tree line. You can see I've kept it sort of fairly uneven, giving it quite a natural look, and then just running a clean damp brush across the base just to bed those trees into the distant lake. And then taking the sharp corner of a cut up piece of plastic store card, or you could use a palette knife or your fingernail, I'm going to etch through the rich paint and just simply create the impression of a few tree trunks in that distant tree line, just to break up that wash a little bit as if the light is reflecting on them. If I put those in now, that will save me a lot of painting later on and just give me that lovely loose suggestion of detail. That should do, and now I'm going to walk away, have a cup of coffee and not touch it at all and just let it dry naturally and then come back and finish the painting. Here it is. I'm pleased with the way it's dried. It's dried back a little bit lighter, but it's still nice and bright and fresh with that sort of sunlight gleaming off the clouds. I'm very pleased with the way these simple clouds have turned out, which was my main focus. But now I'm going to switch focus and concentrate on creating the land to the side of the lake, with a few reeds around the edges, and then I'm going to be painting in a nice sort of large focal point tree on the right hand side. So I'm going to create my land first, and using the Princeton Aqua Elite Mottler or any large flat brush. This one's 1.5 inches, but it doesn't have to be as large as that. Just keep the tips of the brush horizontal, and this is a mixture of cad yellow and Paynes grey, which makes this really nice olivey green, and you can change up the hue a bit by adding a bit of burnt umber to it, or adding a little bit more Paynes grey, or if you want it darker, or a little bit more of the cad yellow if you want it brighter. And then just bring these these lines, these brush strokes in from the right, coming into the water of the lake, and a few in from the left as well, keeping them fairly uneven until you create this rather interesting sweep of land coming across the midground and into the foreground. Leaving some unpainted paper between the brush strokes, and this will give us the look of light reflecting on the scene. Stop it from looking too sort of dead and cluttered. And now, while the paint's still wet or damp, sort of adding in some nice rich Paynes grey here and there, just to darken up the foreground in particular near the base and the base of a lot of these brush strokes, just to give us the look of shadow where the land meets the lake. Again, it's important to keep your brushwork horizontal so that you keep these areas looking nice and flat where the land meets the lake side. And now, just before I leave all this to dry, I'm going to use the corner of my store card again, my flexible store card, or you could use your fingernail or a palette knife, and I'm going to scrape through the damp paint to create the impression of a few grasses and reeds. This does scratch the paper, so if you don't like that effect, then wait until everything's completely dry and then paint your reeds in with a fine lining brush or a rigger. And now it's time just to wait for all that to dry, and then I can paint in my tree. So everything's nice and dry, so I'm safe to paint in my tree without it going sort of blurry or smudgy, or smudging anything with my hand. So I'm mixing up a mixture of Paynes grey and burnt umber, and using my small calligraphy brush, but any small brush with a good point will do for this. I'm going to paint a really short, sturdy trunk, and from it I'm going to have several branches that sort of come out from the trunk. And these are going to be the main branches. They'll come out from the trunk and fan out at fairly sort of shallow angles. And then from these main branches, the secondary branches will be pulled out almost horizontally to give me a lovely sort of spread of branches, a nice shape. So I'm trying to get it to look like a mature oak tree or maybe a chestnut tree. I'm going to be covering the branches with lots of sort of suggestions of canopies and leaves. So I'm not too worried about the shapes of the branches at the end. I'm focusing at the moment on making sure that as the branches leave that short sturdy trunk and the lower part of the main branches, that I've got a nice sort of shape in the way that the branches come out from the trunk. And then once they're covered with the foliage, then hopefully it should look like a fairly sort of effective, convincing and natural tree. So you can see now I'm starting to spread out these secondary branches. If you prefer, you could lightly pencil in where the limit to where you want your branches to finish to give you that nice sort of shape. But I think I already know where I want my tree to go. I want the branches to come off over the tape on the right side, and then to be within an inch or two from the top of the page. As I say, I don't need to paint them all in because the canopies will help to shape the tree. This is my green mixture. It's not quite wet enough, so I'm going to use my Escoda synthetic Ultimo mop brush. It's a size 14, and this is Paynes grey and cad yellow in various amounts to create a sort of slightly different hues as I then place my canopies over that framework of branches that I've just created. Creating some sort of dry brush at the ends and some hit and miss so that I get the leaves breaking up and becoming finer towards the end, but keeping the brushwork more solid across the sort of middle of the tree. And then taking my piece of plastic flexible card and running through with the card to link together and to bring some lighter branches. So I'm linking the dark branches that I painted with the canopies by sort of pulling the card through here and there. As I say, it just brings in a little bit of variety and loosely suggests the light hitting some of the branches. And then back to the smaller brush and the dark colour. And then again, working on linking together canopies and branches. So that's my sort of light first layer of foliage. Now dipping into a stronger, darker mix where there's a little bit more Paynes grey, and I've also added some burnt umber to make it a sort of a brown dark green, and then putting in the shadows. Dropping it into the wet paint, so I'm getting colour blending and diffusion happening within the washes for the canopies, so I'm getting some soft and hard edges. But I'm being really careful not to cover up all my sky behind the tree. That blue sky showing between the gaps is really pretty and a really important part of the composition, so I'm making sure that I don't cover that up. But still trying to make sure that there's enough tone and value in the tree where the thick canopies are excluding the light. And then just running some shadow along underneath the tree. That helps to bed the tree into the land. Now onto the foreground lake. I'm going to put a bit more of the reflected watercolour into the lake here. So this is the cerulean blue. Using my 3/4 inch flat brush, still trying to leave some white areas of paper for sparkle and light and to break up the watercolour, and also painting around some of the paler washes that went on for the first wash, so I've got some variety. But if I paint the foreground slightly darker than the background lake, again I'm getting that sense of distance created by aerial perspective with those paler colours sort of disappearing off into the background. Making sure again that everything's horizontal, that keeps my water surface nice and flat. And now that the water's done, it's time to increase the shadows at the base of the tree. So working around some of the marks that I've scraped or etched through with the card and some of the paler branches, I'm putting in the shadows in my trunk and my lower branches, extending up under the canopies, but still making sure that I keep some of the lighter marks there, so I get a variety of some of the branches picking up a little bit of sunlight, but most of the thicker branches and trunk nice and dark. And that just should add a bit of depth and sort of 3D-ness and dimension to my tree. This dark is Paynes grey and burnt umber mixed together with a little bit of cad yellow just to sort of damp it down a bit. And then, as well as my darks, I want a few little feathery branches linking together some of these larger gaps around the outside edges of the tree. So just a few dark branches sticking out against the light, against the sky. And then I can start to put a little bit of shadow around the edge, just to sort of frame off the painting, to sort of darken off where we have the sort of reeds and grasses just emerging from the lakeside. That just gives me a little bit more shadow. And then I can go into some cad yellow with a tiny bit of Paynes grey, and I can just use a mop brush to just add a bit of light here and there, just on the edges of the tree where the sunlight is just catching it a little bit. Just warms up that edge a little bit more and helps to just round out the tree a bit. Not too much though, just a little bit here and there. And I think I'm just about finished. I quite like the effect of this painting. I love the clouds, and I really like how sort of full of dimension the tree is, and that you can see the clouds and the sky through the tree. And then you can also see traces of that distant tree line as well. So removing the tape and having a look at it with a clean white border, this helps us to see it with fresh eyes, and so we can sort of see whether or not it needs anything else doing to it. But I think I'm just going to pretty much leave it as it is. You could add a few birds if you prefer, but I think this is it's quite nice as this very calm, still, gentle scene. And I also like how warm this feels. The sky and clouds really do evoke summertime, as does the deep green of the leaves and the deep shadows below the canopy, and that little bit of light just from that cad yellow on just the outer edges of the tree. So I hope that was useful, and I hope you'll maybe try something similar yourself, using similar techniques. The sky, as I said earlier, takes a little bit of practice lifting out those clouds, but with practice it could be a really useful way of getting a nice fresh summer sky. So if you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. It's free to do and it really helps with our reach. And if you click on the bell icon, you'll be notified whenever we post new videos. And thank you so much to everyone who supports us on Patreon, either in Morgana's Patreon group where she posts exclusive content, or in mine. If you want to support either of us, please follow the links below. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon, and happy painting. Bye.